Beautiful clouds.
Those aren't clouds, Daddy. Those are chemtrails.
Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio for another week of updates. We have a special guest today, two guests. We have George Barnes with SkyderAlert.com, interactive website, a lot of new updates, a lot of very, very important work has been done to continue to make that site a very valuable tool in the fight to expose climate engineering. So we'll elaborate that in a few minutes. We'll have George on with us in about 15 minutes. A weekly update. Again, we could play the same recording from maybe the last 8 to 10 weeks because the weather makers have patterns virtually, almost without exception, locked into place. Yet another snowstorm being manufactured right now for the East Coast again for next week. Their goal, headlines, and the illusion of winter around the planet. And their illusion works for a lot of people. In fact, I was on a radio show a few days ago, and one listener called in and had the comment to say that I was, or the guest, meaning me, was certainly losing credibility because anybody can see it's cold. Well, it's cold where she's at, but this is what I'm encouraging people to do. Don't believe me. Look at the bigger picture. What I pointed out to her was if we look out the window from any place on the planet, anybody can see the Earth. It's flat, if that's what you choose to believe. But if we look at the bigger picture, we know that it's not flat. People need to look at the bigger picture. So as they whip up these snowstorms, one after another, sounds like we're just saying the same thing week after week, but the pattern doesn't seem to end because I think they know they're not going to get this pattern back once they break it. The temperatures are soaring too rapidly all over the globe. So, again, I encourage people to look at some of the maps we post that shows exactly where they're focusing, geoengineering, Canada, eastern U.S., temperatures in other places around the Arctic as much as 40 degrees above normal. Above normal. Again, it's much warmer in places in the lower 48 than it is literally at the North Pole. It has been this winter. We see a lot of undulatus asperatus clouds. This is because the atmosphere is stratifying. The ocean is also stratifying. It means it's starting to layer. It's not mixing properly. These clouds, again, were not named until 2008, 2009. This is a symptom of the climate engineering and its effect on stratifying the atmosphere. So, and we have academia, and I know we talk about them a lot, but I can't ever really accept how they behave. And this is the normal premise for those in academia, because I hear from a lot of people who say, well, they talk to their credentialed scientist friend who says this isn't so because there's no peer-reviewed study on this, so it can't be so. Well, we see how the system is set up, and that this is the sort of brainwashing in academia that unfortunately has been accepted by so many. And that I don't want to blanket academia. I'm talking about the scientific community here in relation to some of the environmental issues, climate science, and so forth. But they are well trained and all too willing to go along with the simple premise that if it's not in some peer-reviewed, establishment-approved manual, it's not real. And I know people who take this exact position. Not real until those in power say it's real. What kind of an honorless, spineless cop-out is that? That's exactly what it is. And we need, just for those listening too, looking for a bit of assistance perhaps with a website called Disinformation Directory, which I own the domain name to, .com and .org. We want to start exposing publicly those who are responsible for helping to hide the crimes of climate engineering, those who facilitate the official narrative, don't question, don't disclose what they know, and simply do what they're told, because they're accessories to this crime, period. And we want to expose them publicly, expose their public email contacts, which is legal, put them out for the whole world to see, post what it is they've said to help tell the official narrative, and pull the curtain back from these people. They need to be exposed. So we're open to some assistance to run and manage that site. And as we see the spraying increasing everywhere, we're hearing about it everywhere. The dots we connect with this are certainly the climate is unraveling more by the day. What will we expect to happen when you completely derail the system day in, day out? So we're seeing the methane, which we talk about a lot, but it's a global game-changing event, so it warrants such conversation. We're seeing that continuing to unfold, more data on that every day. Encourage people to look at Arctic News, keeping in mind that the Arctic News scientists, some of the AMIG group, either are in a bubble and don't talk about geoengineering because the reasons I already mentioned, or they're being threatened, either or. They don't talk about geoengineering. And really, I had an email from someone who had a statement that absolutely applies. Until a person is willing to discuss geoengineering in the climate change, quote, climate change issue, then they do not deserve to talk about that issue at all. They're not educated enough. If they're not educated on geoengineering, they're not educated enough to talk about climate change, period. So that's a quote we should remember, and I can't remember the name of who sent that to me, but the bottom line is these climate scientists on the Arctic News should be talking about this. They're not. But that doesn't negate the data they're putting out on the methane issue, which is real. So I encourage people to look at Arctic News. Now, on the spraying, again, we're hearing about more spraying everywhere. New report out by Dr. Merkula, which I'm grateful for. Another report conclusively linking aluminum to Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. We know this is a 2 + 2 = 4 equation. We know we're all exposed to this. We know that it's diminishing our cognitive ability by the day. And again, I argue that's why geoengineering is the issue. We won't face any challenge if we don't deal with this one. Silvery white skies. Too many people still think that if they don't see horizon-to-horizon trails, everything's okay. It's not okay. Unless you see blue skies without the silvery white haze, if you block the sun and you see the big aura around the sun, silvery white look to it, the sky's full of particulates. We see that a lot. If you see a brightly colored trail, even if it seems short-lived, they're spraying, really without exception, unless you're in the highest latitudes in the coldest parts of winter. Anything you see that's bright trail is most likely a particulate disbursement. So the fight goes on. There is no let-up. And until we bring this to light, to critical mass of awareness, they will continue to spray. Until we bring it to the awareness to the point where those participating know they are literally exterminating their own families with the rest of us, until we reach that point of awareness, they will continue. So I hope all get up off the bench and help. My regard to those who already are, hearing from many, many more people. But it's going to take all of us every day trying to move the ball forward every single day. Don't argue with the trolls. That's why they're there. They want you to argue with them. Walk away, leave them behind. That's what they don't like. Just focus on moving the ball forward effectively with credible data. So I want to talk to Russ. I want to get Russ on the equation because we're going to have George and Doug here pretty quick. Russ, I know you're settling in a new location where you're at, but the spraying is just as heavy where you're at as it was in Maine. Is that not correct?
Basically true. It's been a little milder here than it has been in Maine overall, if you were to average it all out. But the spraying still is very, very bad. Today we have the silvery white haze. They blocked it out, visible trails all over the sky. And I completely agree with you what you said about trolls. And I want to encourage people, don't waste your time with trolls. There's enough of the population that will respond to the truth if we just get it out to all of them. It's astonishing how many people right now still don't know that, but if you tell them to look up, they know that this is wrong if they just notice this, if you just give them the opportunity to look up. So I definitely back up on that. But yes, bad spraying here. It's all over. I've traveled the United States and it's all over.
Yeah, well, people with those that want to argue, what people need to understand, again, the flat earth theory, if you told them the earth was round, they would present every argument they could to prove that it's flat. So you can't get anywhere in that kind of an argument. There's no point trying. Just walk away and try to communicate with somebody who wants to wake up. So,
plus, Dane, can I throw this in too? James Turner, who's an attorney, he's a consumer attorney who has fought, NutraSweet and a lot of other issues too, has basically told us that government agencies like the FDA are not working to protect the consumer. They actually are created for the purposes of protecting the industry that they regulate. And that go ahead.
You're exactly correct. In fact, to elaborate on that, and I know I've shared some firsthand experiences with EPA in Sacramento, California Air Resources Board, Barbara Boxer's office, other meetings I've had in the Capitol, but those agencies exist to hide the real issues. That's the point and purpose of those agencies, to give the illusion that they are watching, to make sure that there's safety measures in our environment. Could not be further from the truth. The purpose of all these agencies, EPA, even now Fish and Game, California Department of Fish and Game doesn't measure for aluminum anymore in runoff. California State Water Quality, no more testing for aluminum in the drinking water. The point and purpose of those agencies is to hide whatever they're told to hide, and that's that. So, but there are some things that can't be hidden much longer. I've said this a lot in the recent weeks and months, and I'll say it again right now. The warming of the planet and the damage done from climate engineering, from bees. In fact, saw some bee reports this morning. Some of the beekeepers back east have lost 80%. Some have lost 100% of their colonies. The ecosystem is crashing now. Can't hide that very long. And this parade of engineered snowstorms is going to diminish as we head into later months of the year. I think we're going to see a very protracted warming around the U.S. They'll probably try to keep the center-north latitudes cooler to try to keep some of these records going that they've fed with climate engineering, but I think you'll see a very protracted warming, a continued up and down yo-yo effect that we see whenever an engineered event clears off. The temperatures spike up 30, 40 degrees, but you can't hold that lid on the boiling kettle only so long, and they're killing everything, virtually killing everything. The forest die-off around us in Northern California is horrific, and the UV in the spring is just absolutely nonstop. So anyway, I think they're going to have a tough time hiding this as we head into the next weeks and months. Geopolitical events, Ukraine, and the sort of media rhetoric we see, the power structures maneuvering itself for some sort of big event, probably. We can all guess as to what that might be, but I think some sort of shoe will probably drop soon as the curtain gets pulled back in a lot of arenas with the power structure.
Yeah, talking about the environmental agencies and the environmental organizations as well, they're there to make people feel like they're protected. They make the public feel protected, and it's really like a psychological operation in a sense, because it makes the people feel protected when they're actually being, this is controlled opposition. These groups, these environmental groups are supposed to be opposing this type of activity, but they're controlled by the very entity that is doing the spraying. So,
absolutely true.
Yeah, controlled opposition.
Let's bring. I want to emphasize everybody needs to know what steps they can take to expose this issue, to expose climate engineering. And one of the, really arguably right now, the best single tool we might have is SkyderAlert.com, that interactive app. Let's bring George on now, and I want to have George answer questions. Russ, if you can give the call-in number as well so people can ask George questions. We'll take call-ins maybe at about 25 after, about 10 more minutes. I want George to be able to explain the situation first, and then so I'll try to figure out the best and most effective way to use SkyderAlert.com in order to sound the alarm, because we absolutely need to sound the alarm as loud as we can, as fast as we can. So can we bring Russ on, or bring George on, Russ, and then we'll let him explain the app to everybody, and we'll take call-ins in later.
Very good. Yeah, give me about 45 seconds to pull him in. Go ahead.
You bet. So anyway, for those listening still, many of you are familiar with SkyderAlert.com. There are a lot of new changes on it right now. Just happened. I think a lot of that just went live yesterday, so I want George to go over that. And again, from every direction, we need to start spot fires of awareness. If we can start enough spot fires and merge those into a giant blaze, that's how we're going to get this issue to the light of day. And we are gaining ground. I'm hearing from a lot of places that are non-choir groups who are now alerted to this situation. So we're reaching critical mass, but we need to keep our pace. It's as if you're rounding the last turn in a long race. You can't lose your stride or you won't make it to the tape in time. So anyway, I hope everybody continues to evaluate the effective ways they can raise awareness. The upper left corner of GeoEngineeringWatch.org, we have activism suggestions. I think we have George coming on now, perhaps.
Hey, Russ.
George.
Hey.
Good to have you. Good to have you with us, my friend. And I've just explained a little bit about the app. Again, for everybody listening, this is George Barnes, filmmaker of Look Up. It's won, I think, 9 or 10 awards, George, so far?
9 awards so far, and we had a sold-out crowd in Cleveland on Thursday.
Outstanding. Yeah, tell us about that. How did that go?
Well, I didn't go to the show because I was working, but we were able to just get a tremendous turnout just using our network, and by putting it up on the website, it was a sold-out crowd.
Outstanding. Yeah, now a lot of those people, I think, are starting to become aware that the weather's not right. It's anything but right. And you've made, I mentioned before the show, George, you've made a lot of changes to Skyder Alert. It's done a lot of good already, but some of the changes will give us an even better mechanism to raise awareness, yes?
Yes. There's this new version of the Skyder Alert app has got a much faster connection to Twitter now, so it's optimized for Twitter. It's optimized for Facebook, so people can actually take one picture and in a click post it to Twitter and their Facebook site too, and it comes pre-populated with like where they are and a little bit of a note explaining what they're seeing in the sky, so they don't even have to take any effort other than just take a picture and hit the send button.
You know, in sharing all those photos, it's very helpful to those, especially that are new to this issue, for them to constantly see what the spraying looks like, because a lot of people have been so exposed to already tainted skies, they don't know what a real cloud looks like. They don't know what a real sky should look like. And in the background, maybe you could explain this to the listeners too, George, that how you got onto this issue and just how hard it is now to find a sky that's not tainted.
Okay, well, how I came to the issue is really disturbing. It was by testing a time-lapse camera, just testing it for a regular Volkswagen shoot that we were doing, and we processed the footage but accidentally processed it in reverse. So what we saw was the whole white overcast sky, when played in reverse, was being created by these planes, and they're just flying in a grid pattern. Now, when you played it backwards at high speed, you could see that's what was creating the overcast. And in looking at our archival footage back 20 years of archival footage, we could see that this never was occurring in the skies in Florida until early 2000s, and then it became more and more prominent. And now, if you talk to any professional photographer or director of photography, one of the problems everyone has is the sky is always white. It's almost never blue, and it's definitely never blue if you look towards the horizon.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. That's a lot of people don't really connect that dot. If they look up and they don't see a horizon-to-horizon trail, they think nothing's going on. And that's why, again, where Skyder Alert can be so effective in showing all the different variances of the spraying, like the tainted horizons that you're mentioning, so that people understand just how saturated the atmosphere is, that we almost never see anything blue. I mean, this in the backgrounds, George, so a lot of the commercials we see and so forth, where now we're seeing trails, very blatant in-your-face trails, or these dirty backgrounds. Do you think that that's an effect in certain case that certain types of advertising they want to have there for conditioning, or you think these people just can't find a clear sky?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One of the things is it's a limitation of money when you're doing a photo shoot. Basically, it's there's now a term for it, believe it or not, that's evolved over the past 4 or 5 years. It's called sky replacement. And that is a specific term that you use in post-production for the process of replacing the sky because, most people don't want a dirty, white, milky sky in their shot for the beauty shots. So it's become so prominent that there's actually a phrase for it. And if you look, what's really interesting about the new Skyder Alert app is now it populates where users are seeing it onto this map. And what's funny is even if you see horizon to horizon, if you look to the north and the horizon's white and look to the south and the horizon's a little clearer, if you look on the Skyder Alert homepage where you click on the map, you can see other people submitting images from the north. So it's crazy. The accuracy that the map and the GPS positioning has is really it's really troubling.
Yeah, the whole situation is damn troubling, and the amount of people who are willing to go along with whatever they're told to keep their jobs, to keep their advances coming or their promotions. Not a lot of honor left in the equation right now. And I see one thing that struck me particularly profoundly was a National Geographic article from some time back, but a picture of Yosemite. And in the background were 3 perfectly parallel stripes, even for National Geographic, who takes a lot of time to put together their magazines and articles. But it was so blatant and so in your face. I mean, what's your thoughts on something like that with a publication like that?
Oh, well, the thoughts are tricky. Part of the reality is National Geographic is really specific about retouching, so they don't do sky replacement as part of their protocol just for production. That's just not in their, they just don't do that. I guess they feel that the photographs would be altered too much. And the reality is that is what the sky looks like today. Almost anywhere you go, if you're there and the sky is blue, you're going to see these stripes in the sky. So I think that, I don't know if it's intentional, but it is absolutely what the sky is looking like now. There's just no doubt about it.
That makes sense, and I know a lot of people theorized that these trails were being added to older movies, and I never felt that was the case, and I know your opinion on that. I'll ask in a minute. And I look back at my own pictures from the 70s, and I found this aerosol clouds in the air in certain photos then, and above some of these big box office productions for Hollywood, even in the 60s, which I've seen trails there. If we know how much time and planning that the power structure puts into to most everything they do, especially something like this, and as less widespread as the spraying was then, they may have made it a point to be in the skies above big box office productions back that far, because certainly we do see them in some of those older films when the spraying was not nearly so prevalent. But that's, I don't know if you've seen any of those old films, George, but it certainly looks like the spraying was actually in the sky above those productions, does it not?
Yeah, you can see them, but it's pretty. I think honestly that's just luck of the draw. I really do.
It may be. It's just for me, knowing and looking at a lot of the data, how far back they planned on continuing this climate engineering, and when we see it put into kids' films and so forth, animated films, that starts to raise the eyebrows for me. When I see it in over the hedge, cars, and so forth, these big blatant trails, that's pretty alarming for me. But the bottom line on getting the word out, which is what we need to do now, yes, I mean the app you have now, it's fully updated now, so that people, I know had a little issue with the other app before. I mean, everything's up to date now, up to speed, and should work for all applications, right?
It is fully up to date. It's fully up to speed with all the politicians. Everything is redistricted, and everyone that's currently in office is updated for that database, which was quite a challenging process to actually keep that up to date. So yeah, it is working 110%. And I did want to bring up one thing on that, and that is, when we first released the app, it was a paid app, and it got immediate traction, went to top 5 on iTunes and top 10 on Twitter almost immediately, and stayed there for a while. And we were initially getting some feedback to say, well, you should make it free. You should just release it for nothing. And we did that. So version 2 was a free release. But what happened was people just weren't using it. It was weird. It got more downloads, but nobody used it. The people that paid for the app tended to use it. So version 3, we re-released as a paid app with the hopes that it's people that are serious and really value what the app can do. You know, I mean, it's the same price as a cup of coffee, so it's not that expensive at $2.99. But we're hoping that it'll have the mindset for people to really get involved and just give them a little initiative to actually use the app, because just having it is one thing, but they need to actually use it.
Well, in addition, if I can interject this, people have no idea in general, and I'm just really getting up to speed completely at how much work this is, how much money you've invested into try to getting this going for the common good, and what it takes to keep these wheels turning. So, I mean, that's an extremely small investment for people to help this cause move forward. And they have no idea the legal work that goes into what you've done, the internet work, and how complex this all is, how much effort it is. So, I mean, I encourage everybody to, if they really want to deal with this issue that we must deal with or it's game over, everybody needs to pull together and support your work, and I certainly do. We'll try to support from GeoEngineering Watch as much as we can. And Russ, have you used the app as well?
I don't have any devices that are modern enough to use apps on, unfortunately. I'm still, as far as the mobile communications department, I'm living in the dark ages here, but I haven't used it, unfortunately.
Well, some people like Russ or even myself, I mean, Russ is a huge help with us on the site and GeoEngineering Watch as well as Global Sky Watch. I know we're sometimes so buried in what we're doing, it's hard to cover all the bases. But anyway, this with what George has done now, it's a whole new rung on the ladder moving up. And again, time is not on our side, and this is really the single best, most interactive tool we have. So I hope people not only use the app, but also support the film Look Up. Great intro tool. You can have screenings. The film's also available. George, give us a little bit of an update on the film right now and where we're headed with that.
Yeah, I mean, it is available for anybody. If they want to run it in their local theaters or whatever, I'm happy to send them a copy that they could screen at their local library or wherever. It just keeps winning awards. I've been in the movie business for 20 years, and I've never had a film that's won 9 awards in 9 months. It's just a ridiculous response. It's really incredible. So it's totally well received, and the film is good for educating people as far as what's going on and what it looks like. But the app really is the only tool that we have. It's the only tool that exists for this kind of activism to mobilize that many people. And you saw, Dane, we got some letters back from some congressmen. They're acknowledging it, and it's because they're getting 2,000 petitions, 10,000 petitions, 100,000 petitions. The power that the app has to bring everybody together with the same exact message and target the same politicians is it's a very, very powerful tool. It's the only tool.
And coming from George, for those that don't know his background, George has a lot of experience in this arena. He knows what it takes to get something on the radar. So this tool is imperative. And again, having the same message as George stated and heading the same direction, everybody together, is also imperative. If we're herding cats 25 different ways, it doesn't move the ball forward. So again, George's background is in this arena, and he knows what to do to get the job done. I think there's no arguing this is the tool that we need to use. And George, you have Dr. Doug with you too, right?
I do.
This to stress the imperative nature of this cause, that we must bring this to light fast, and using your tool and the health issues that we're all facing. I mean, I don't know anybody who's not having some kind of respiratory issues at this point. We're all being bombarded with this stuff day in, day out. It's virtually imploding the environment. We'll be right behind that. The environment goes down, we go down, period. So on the health effects to the human organism, Doug, if you're there, give the listeners a quick rundown on what happens when you inhale and absorb this kind of toxic brew of metals day in, day out, 24/7. How much can the body take, and how critical is our time frame right now?
Well, our time frame is pretty critical. What they're spraying every day is something that has really no physiological benefit to the body. And as a result, as George and I have said to each other, what comes up must come down. So sooner or later, what they're spraying up in the sky is going to be coming down. It is coming down. And as a result, we are breathing it in every single day. Specifically, elements like aluminum, nanoparticles of aluminum that when we breathe it in have an affinity to the central nervous system and can cause cognitive behavior changes, can cause motor changes, can cause sensory changes. And what the majority of people don't connect the dots with is people that are suffering from certain type of neurological problems. They can be exposed to these type of particles and not realize that they've been exposed to it.
But they continue to build up in the system, and this is all bioaccumulative, yes?
That's correct. That's correct. What happens is that there's a certain amount of, I wouldn't say acceptable toxicity, but the body can handle a certain amount of exposure. However, it reaches a point where there's critical mass when the body can no longer purge the toxicity, and as a result, this is when it can start to cause health problems in the body.
Hey, Doug, if you can give listeners a bit of your background, because, you know, for everybody listening, Doug is an absolute expert, written a book on human health. Explain that book and what you've survived, Doug, to get to this point, because
Sure.
We're lucky to have you with us.
Sure. I wrote a book called Answer to Cancer. Basically, it's living a life cancer-free. It's available pretty much everywhere. My background is that I'm a cancer survivor. I felt writing a book like the one I wrote is very important to people that have suffered from cancer and don't know what to do after they've had cancer. The book deals with preventative issues, and it deals with risk factors. And why I got on board here is that for the public to realize that there's two types of risk factors. There is something called a modifiable risk factor and a non-modifiable risk factor. And a modifiable risk factor is something that we can actually change in our body to keep us healthy. So if you're a person that is eating a poor diet, you can modify that and start eating a healthy diet. If you're a person that's a smoker, well, that's a modifiable risk factor. You can just stop smoking. The problem comes in is the spraying that they're doing every day is not a modifiable risk factor. So I feel it's our civic duty to stop the spraying by getting the app and making changes so we don't have this type of toxic exposure that can cause a tremendous problem to human health.
And it's forced on you.
It is forced on you, and a lot of people don't realize that lung cancer is the number one cause of cancer death worldwide.
On the non-modifiable part, that's the part that people really need to consider, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Doug, that this is, again, the point you've made over and over. If you can't walk out the door and breathe without sucking this in, you have a fight for life on your hands right here, right now. And with George's tool, so many people feel alone and isolated that they don't know who to reach out to or who to connect with or how to get the word out. And that's the tool that SkyderAlert.com gives us, where people can unite, connect, and have their voice heard. And this is, again, the central platform around which we could really make a movement and get on the radar with this issue. And time is so imperative right now that we do that. So, Doug, with the synergistic toxicity of these metals, as they each one individually, of course, highly toxic and harmful. When we blend those metals, much more lethal brew. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. It's because it's more than one metal. It's aluminum, barium. And when they do this concoction, we're breathing it in, and we take about 16 breaths a minute, and these metals go through our bloodstream, ends up in our tissues, so people can have problems with their thyroid and not realize they've had toxic element exposure. They can have problems with hormonal areas and not realize they've had toxic metal exposure, neurological problems and not realize they've had toxic metal exposure. So yeah, the more toxins, the worse it is for the body.
And we remember those snow results that I took in New Jersey was like off the meter with lead and mercury.
Yeah, we're seeing lead in tests here too. And we have also, as we blend this mix together, we're all absorbing these particles. And there's an issue of MNPs, magnetic nanoparticles, that are showing up now. And when you start adding all these RF frequencies, these radio frequencies that we're all exposed to, given all the conductivity in our bodies now, it's wreaking havoc on our systems, period. And Russ, when they're spraying heavy, you have a great deal of trouble sleeping, correct?
I have a whole set of symptoms that are associated with it. Since I can smell them, I know when they're present, and I can see not only my symptoms, but I can associate the symptoms of the people I know around me with them, and they always correlate to heavy spraying. When the air gets really bad, and I smell how intense it is, everybody gets tired. Depends on what type. There are different types. But I want to back up what I believe George said just a minute ago about high mercury. We did a dust test here. Two things. I did a dust test here where I took a dust sample out of an air purifier here. A couple micrograms, if I remember, 0.3 micrograms of mercury in the dust test, which is a lot of mercury, by the way. The other thing is that what's interesting is I have a background in studying mercury toxicity and its effects on the body. And what's interesting is that so many of these symptoms are are so perfectly lined up with aluminum and mercury toxicity that people have from this. It's very astonishing. But you found a lot of mercury then, hey?
Yeah, I'm looking at the chart here. 53.7 units of lead and 2.1 of mercury.
Wow.
Now, to give people an idea, when we say it increases toxicity, we're not talking about 10, 20, 30%. Studies that we were given in the case of mercury and aluminum, we all have mercury in us, we know that, and now we all have aluminum in us. There's no question about that. So in the case with lab rats, when enough mercury was given to kill 1 in 100 lab rats, was combined with enough aluminum to kill 1 in 100 lab rats, all the rats die. Toxicity increases 10,000%. So we're not talking about a little bit worse, we're talking about astronomically worse. So this brew of toxic elements can't be overstated, and we don't know what else is in this. I mean, we don't know what biological agents there may be in this. We have the Carnicom Institute showing what I've been told from people from their institution, that they're seeing what they believe to be engineered pathogens with characteristics of a fungus, bacterial, and viral.
The nanoparticle technology is very dangerous technology.
It is.
Yeah, because you're at a cellular level, it increases the permeability of a cell, and it'll actually kill the cell.
And the other thing is there's not really a common method of testing for that, because what I learned on this test, I wanted to have the guys test some other stuff too, like chloride or any other types of gases, but just due to the nature of the kit that was sent out, they said, well, no, that's the metal kit, so you can only do a metal panel.
And also what we're seeing, and George, same what we saw with your test, the labs have now radically increased their detection limit, which means they're hiding a lot. So when they increase, the labs that we've used here in Northern California have historically shown down as small as 1 ppb, 1 part per billion. Now we're seeing labs bump that up where they don't show anything below 200 parts per billion. That's an astronomical increase in their detection limits. So that simply tends to hide things. I got a bit of an echo there. Russ, you hear that too?
Yeah, I think it should be gone in a second.
Okay, got it. So we don't know which labs are going to really be helpful in this if they're not going to show the limit. This is what we saw again with the radiation after Fukushima, where they just raised the quote-unquote safe limit by 10,000%. So right now, quote-unquote science is simply a term used for whatever the establishment says is so, even if it's completely wrong, completely harmful, completely dangerous. The term is very loosely used. So people need to think for themselves, think out of the box, verify data. And just because you have a friend that's a scientist who says it isn't so, if that's an excuse for you to walk away, then you're not looking hard enough. So the bottom line is if we could reach critical mass of awareness, that's the key. And the tool that George has given us for that is really the single best tool we can rally around. And I hope everybody puts that to use, shares it with others, and puts this issue on the radar, because
we have a question on the forum about the app.
Okay.
Somebody in the chat room. But before I say that, I want to mention real quick, I'm looking at an abstract right now that says exposure to certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, electric fields, actually increases cell poration and cell fusion rates, meaning that you can open up toxicity, you can open up cells to tremendous, many times toxicity by exposure to certain frequencies of electric fields. So
this would dovetail in, Russ, with electronically stimulated biotech that can also be, I mean, the science exists for this, that we could all be seeded with pathogens that become more virulent when exposed to the right frequency. So, from both directions, the danger is there, certainly.
Exactly.
That's why I really think that, if everyone just focuses and gets the common message out that we really got to shine the light on geoengineering and shine the light on these aerosol spray programs, regardless of whatever it is, just say, hey, look, we're just not okay with this. It's like nuclear testing. But it's going to take a lot of people. I mean, do you know it took 1 million people in one place at one time to protest, to make a loud enough noise to stop nuclear testing? 1 million people at once.
George's point is absolutely valid in that the simple message needs to be, it's going on, it's highly toxic, it's destroying the atmosphere, it needs to stop. It's and poisoning all of us, it needs to stop, period. So that simplicity of message is important. I agree with you, George.
Question for George. Somebody on the chat room wants to know if Skyler will work on the sand. Oh, are you still with us, George?
I'm here.
Okay, good. On the Samsung Galaxy tablet?
Yes, it will.
Great. Okay. That answers that for the person on the forum. Also, one other question that came through on the chat room, if anybody wants to handle this, I could myself. The street lights have blurry type halos around the light. I thought that it was my eyes, and my little one saw it too. Is this due to the spraying? Any thoughts?
You can answer that, rest of you.
Well, yeah, I can tell you, since I can actually smell it, I can tell you that I first saw the daily spraying start when I lived in Jamestown, New York in 2005. That's when they started gridding the sky all of a sudden, because you never see jets in the sky in Jamestown because they don't have a big airport that can handle large jets. And immediately what I noticed is there were halos, and they almost looked three-dimensional. It was amazing that people weren't standing around looking at the lights. And these halos, these three-dimensional looking halos that are kind of orangish and yellow in color, would always appear in their visibility was in ratio, was in right lockstep with the intensity of the metals that I could smell in the air. So I saw this phenomenon. I had never seen it before in my life until the spraying began.
Well, the constant saturation, Doug, I have a question that I want to pull you in on here too.
Okay.
We see respiratory mortality. Now, I know between 2005 and 2010, respiratory mortality went from 8th on the list of mortality to 3rd. Mm-hmm. That should have been headlines on every paper around the globe. Now we see species extinction rate, as I've said many times. The current statistics show 200 or more species of plant and animal going extinct every day. 70 to 80% of that is fungally related. So when we see chronic sinusitis going epidemic right now, Doug, correct? Chronic sinusitis is
Absolutely
off the charts, right?
Yes.
And now, according to the places like the institutions like the Mayo Clinic, they think that 90 to 95% of that chronic sinusitis is fungally related. So when you kill all the beneficial organisms, just like you do in the human body when you take antibiotics, you kill the beneficial microbes, fungus moves in, correct? And we see that environmentally. We see everything is fungally infected.
That's correct.
From oak trees to hardy species of brush, and certainly in our own sinuses. So what the effect on the human body with chronic fungal infections?
Well, what's happening is that the spraying is we're not only breathing it in, but it's affecting the soil, it's affecting the water, it's affecting our food supply, and what that's doing in our body, time will tell, but you know it's not a good thing. And you start to throw off the pH of the body. You start to throw off the biochemistry of the body, and pathogens start to take over, and this is precisely what's happening.
Well, on the pH of the water, and this is one of the ways we tell without extensive lab testing if moisture is being heavily seeded, when we can measure while it's raining and get a pH of 6.6, sometimes 6.8, we know there's metal in that rain. Rain should be about 5.6. There's carbon in the atmosphere, makes the rain naturally acidic. And when we see these pHs jump, and many people don't realize that from 5.5 to 6.5, or from 5.6 rather to 6.6, a jump of 1 full point, that's 10 times more alkaline. A lot of people don't realize that. So we're not talking about small changes. We're talking about huge changes. And we've tested the rainwater when we're getting this 6.6 pH. That's 10 times above normal. It's full of aluminum. So, and now we see that the frozen precipitation that's been happening all over the east, all over the planet, this nucleated precipitation. We don't know exactly what's in that all the way around. We can only guess. We know certain constituents, but again, all these elements, as Dr. Doug said, changing pHs, killing soil microbes. We can't grow a garden in Northern California without extreme difficulty. Have you guys experienced that back there? Are you seeing plant die-off, tree die-off on the East Coast?
Tough to grow tomatoes.
Yeah, same here.
And I'll tell you, talk about the tree die-off. That's interesting because another anomaly that's occurring around the country, and it's common chatter amongst all other professional directors of photography, is that the foliage in general is no longer really green. It's just not emerald green. And there's a new series of plugins for the color correction process that it's now emerging to compensate for that, to artificially colorize the greens, to bring out the lighter color of the greens that used to exist, especially in new foliage in springtime. The leaves are just, in general, the wrong color.
That's funny you should bring that up. I looked at a aerial photograph of the forest around my home from about 5 years ago, and it shocked me. It was so much more green than we see now. And a couple reasons for that we know of. One, when you're filling the atmosphere with light scattering particles, you change the light wavelength form. And we don't know, because there's no study, as to what effect that has on photosynthesis. We now know the UV is absolutely off the charts, as we discussed before. We know, we're metering it, and we know in the case of UVB, for example, the more lethal band, that it's at least 1,200% higher than it should be. That causes trees to change their color of foliage, causes them to drop the amount of foliage they have, causes them to let branches go where branches die throughout the tree. George, you've been to Northern California. You've seen the bark burn off the trees here, yes?
Dane, I got to tell you, and just tell all the listeners, when you first told me that, I was a little skeptical, all right? Because you made it sound so extreme. And then when I got there and actually saw, when we were in that parking lot and every single tree has the bark burned off on the south side of the tree from the foot of the tree to the top.
Yep.
I got to tell you, man, that was the most disturbing thing that I saw on that visit. Every single tree. It didn't even matter what kind of tree it was.
No, it didn't. And this is what so many people on planet Earth take for granted, this very complex and delicate atmosphere that allows us to exist. It makes our planet different than Venus or Mars. And we are absolutely assaulting that very thin membrane of life-supporting gas with everything that the human race can throw at it. And quite simply, our days are numbered if that continues. So for those that don't understand UV, you have several bands of UV: UVA, UVB, UVC. Below UVC is X-ray. So you have UVA at the top. We're told 95% of UV that hits the planet is UVA. We now know that at least 60% is UVB, which means it's at least 1,200% higher than we're being told. Now we're getting UVC on the surface too. UVC is the last band of UV radiation before we hit X-ray. So that should give people an idea of just how lethal this is. So you're not feeling as much effect on the East Coast because they've kept you cloaked in cloud cover. Now, on any given day, you look at the continental U.S., huge percentages of the North American continent are covered with clouds, aerosol or aerosol mixed with natural but huge percentages of largely rainless cloud cover. You guys have been under cloud cover very consistently in the East Coast, yes?
Well, Dane, that's another thing that's also common chatter, especially amongst people here, is you almost never get 2 clear days in a row. Almost never. If you have a nice day, you can rest assured that the next day there's going to be spraying.
Now, on that note, after 9/11, and I posted this film. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see it yet, George or Dr. Doug, and Russ too, but it's posted on GeoEngineering Watch. It's called Dimming the Sun.
I did see Dimming the Sun.
You saw that, okay? Yeah.
I did.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's real, and I also thought that it was very interesting when they were talking about atmospheric spraying, and they had that section in there with the planes with the same spray devices that are outside of the planes.
Yeah.
On the outside of the planes that are used for cloud seeding or spraying or whatever, or weather modification. And it's just, it was a very interesting segment on the geoengineering.
I highly recommend people view this documentary. It's on the front page of GeoEngineering Watch. And here's another point that's brought up in that documentary. After 9/11, you mentioned, George, never 2 days in a row without spraying or without cloud cover.
Yep.
After 9/11, when all the jets were grounded, temperatures shot up astronomically in meteorological terms or frameworks. So we had daytime highs rise 2 degrees. In the next 2 days, nighttime lows dropped. It's exactly what you'd expect if you lose that cloud cover. So this is what it shows for the mentality of the geoengineers. They can cool temperatures temporarily, but at what cost? At the cost of destroying the whole natural system and making the overall warming far worse. Is that worth it? It's like a heroin addict shooting heroin to try to cure his addiction. It only makes things exponentially worse. So I would highly recommend that film to people. The filmmakers didn't openly acknowledge geoengineering, but I think you can see that they were aware of it. If you watch this film, it's very educational, and it shows the effect of climate engineering. Again, when you're blocking so much of the sunlight, in fact, global dimming figures right now 22 to 25%. 22 to 25% of the sun's direct rays no longer reaching the surface of the planet. It takes a lot of metal to do that. All that metal, as Doug and George said, what goes up must come down. All of it is being absorbed into our food, our water, and our lungs. So it can only continue so long. And Doug, one thing that, if you can point out, as you said, the human body can only take so much and then it can't take any more. Now, that's a non-linear equation, correct? That you
Correct.
can go along for quite a while thinking that, well, you're not doing too bad, but when you hit the limit, it can happen fast, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Spraying is a stressor, so the body can tolerate the stress. But what happens is that gradual things start to happen inside the body. A person can go through hormonal changes. A person can go through neurological changes. Metals can affect cardiac output, all these things, and people will never associate the two. So toxicity does have an effect on the homeostasis of the body. I do want to point out about the dimming. 75% of adult Americans do not get adequate amount of vitamin D, and we get the majority of vitamin D from sunlight. Sunlight basically hits the skin. Conversions happen, goes into a liver. The liver converts something else, goes into the kidney, converts it to an active form of vitamin D. And vitamin D does a lot of wonderful things in the body. Besides mineralizing bones, it has a tremendous immune effect on the body, where it does positive things for the body immunologically. And it is a colon cancer preventative, it's a breast cancer preventative, it's a prostate cancer preventative. So if you're not getting adequate amount of vitamin D to your body, you are going to get sick. So this is the health issue that many people, probably a lot of listeners, don't realize, is that we need that sun. We need as much sunlight as we can get so that we can be and stay healthy.
This is, I think 75%, and I've seen as much as some reports say 90% or even 95%. So it's certainly an epidemic, and the double-edged sword here is, as they've shredded the ozone layer, we have a bit of a problem taking too much sun in either. So it's really creating a dark corner for us to be in, and also the amount of vitamin D that the body produces. I think what I read, Doug, is that if in pretty full exposure, in something like 15 minutes, your body can produce tremendous amounts of vitamin D, something like 15,000 units or...
That's correct.
Or 20,
yep.
Okay. Yeah,
yep.
You can elaborate on that if you
want.
want.
Well, yeah. And the bottom line is that we need the sun. And if we're being dimmed and a lot of people just aren't outside as they used to be, you're just not getting adequate amount of vitamin D being produced and synthesized in the body. So the body is trying to, what a lot of people don't realize is that vitamin D works as a hormone and it has what's called a receptor site. So vitamin D, it's like a locking key where vitamin D is the key and the receptor site is the lock. But there is actual locks on our DNA, on our genetic material. So here are these locks waiting for the keys to tell the genes what to do. But if you don't have enough keys or enough vitamin D, the genes don't know what to do. And as a result, the body is left to its own devices to try to figure out what to do on a cellular level. So we need adequate amount of vitamin D. Vitamin D is not very common in our foods. That's why when your listeners go to the food store, they see milk that's fortified with vitamin D. There's not very many foods that provide it. So we do need the sun, and we need the sun not to be dimmed. And everybody has to get on board and not only become informed, but stay connected through these great websites and stay active by using the app.
Well, I think Doug and Russ, and George, you guys are all involved in this because you see its full ramifications and you see it as a priority issue. I believe that's the case, and it's certainly the case with me, that there's the ramifications from the climate engineering are so great, so horrific, and so all-encompassing that this is the issue that must be dealt with. And we see even for example, with the organic food people, we know now that this material is being absorbed by all plant life. We're seeing what Norwegian researchers have termed as horizontal gene mutation in all plant life. That means there is no organic food anymore. We're seeing mutated plants in the forest in Northern California. A lot of plants don't come up at all. Those that do are literally different colors now. They're mutated with leaves that are either, in some cases, bigger, other cases smaller. We're seeing some profound things happening in the forest here. And it takes a mountain of metal, by the way. Forest floor pHs have changed here 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. It takes a tremendous amount of metal to do that, all of which is going into our environment, our ecosystem. So, and Doug, the constant ingestion of this metal and inhalation, all of these avenues of absorption just start to pile up, yes?
Absolutely. They start to pile up, and the body finds it very difficult to get rid of it, and it just embeds into tissues, and that's where it becomes a real problem. Because again, as I had mentioned earlier, it has no physiological benefit to the body. These are toxic elements, and they do not benefit the body whatsoever.
Hey, Dane, we have a question from the chat room. I've heard this question from a lot of people. I wonder if I could give this to George so people can have a good answer on this.
Yeah, fire away.
Somebody from the chat room asked, I've heard this a lot before. I know we only have a minute, but one of the people in the chat said, I found it hard to believe that Skyder alerts are not being blocked by ISP or email server administrators before getting to politicians, etc. Seems politicians would have complained about the Skyder alert messages or excessive messages. Can you ask George if the technology is able to get to those, or if it has a potential for being blocked?
Here is that's a great question, and that was the issue that we had with version 1. Version 1 went to their emails, and yes, they have a whole slew of box trappers, and basically the politicians now do not get email that goes to them. Even if you go through the process, it goes to their handlers or to other people in their administrative offices. That was the big improvement now with version 3. All politicians follow their own Twitter feed because there's no hiding from that. There's no blocking a Twitter feed. So the way we've been able to get around that and ensure that the petitions are delivered is we were able to create actually and patent that process to do the petitions through Twitter.
That's wonderful.
So everybody support George with Skyder Alert. Russ, go ahead and stand up. Let's all rally behind George.
Yeah, get behind George. This is Russ Tanner on behalf of GeoEngineering Watch Radio. Join us every Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 noon Pacific Time at ucy.tv. See you next week. Thank you, George. Okay.
Have a good day.